Welcome and thank you. My name is Ronn Jefferson. I'm the product manager for Geberit North America. It's my pleasure to have you here today with us, and thank you for taking some time out of your busy day, especially in these times. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. I just want you to think about this. Whether you realize it or not, you run into, or at least when we could leave our houses, you ran into wall-hung or off-the-floor fixtures everywhere in your daily life. You saw them at movies, houses, at airports, retail stores, restaurants, and so on. So today what I want to talk to you about is taking on that same concept, but applying it into a different applications. So thinking about wall-hung bathroom fixtures for residential, hospitality, or even for semi-public applications. So what I want you to walk away from today, the presentation, is with these sort of a few key points. First, as I just mentioned, is exposure to the concept. Secondly, understand the benefits of such a concept and how it works. And then some key tips and things that you can do to specify a concept and things to watch out for when you're doing it. And then finally, at the end, a little bit about us, Geberit. So in the beginning, let me start by showing you what I'm talking about. In this first image, I want you to think about the size, which is, of course, the first thing that comes up to me in these two small bathrooms. It really makes me appreciate the fact, and I understand the trend that we hear from home builders and designers that point towards this more use of wall-mounted or floating fixtures. It's really a great trick that I've learned from designers over the years that opens up small spaces and makes it feel more spacious and gives you more room to walk around, especially those pesky powder rooms. Of course, the key thing that I see, or rather don't see in this picture, is a toilet tank. And for those of you who are familiar or not familiar with the concept, I'll give you a hint. The toilet tank is hidden. It's behind here. As you might expect, such a concept like this, where you have a small spaces, is really taken off in New York City, as you might expect, and areas that have a high population density are a bit more cosmopolitan. In fact, that was really the genesis of such an idea. How do I fit into such a small space and make it feel a bit more comfortable and roomy to move around in? Second benefit of such a concept is, of course, the aesthetic, the look. I think this is really a great bathroom view. I especially like the view out of the window. It's absolutely gorgeous. The thing that I take away from this bathroom is that it's really clean and neat, contemporary and modern. If you look on the left-hand side, you actually see it's an open floor with a wet floor and the shower. And then finally, all around the perimeter actually is this shelf feature built off in front of these beautiful bricks. And again, something that's missing that I noticed right away is there's no tank. And in this case, it's hidden underneath this plate inside this nice shelf area. Although I talk about it here for contemporary, I also want to tell you that this concept works just as well for traditional. There are quite a few case studies I've seen and images I've seen all over the web. I was personally involved in a renovation near Philadelphia a few years ago with Ellen Cheever, where we used this concept in a really traditional bathroom. So contemporary or modern or traditional, these kind of floating fixtures work in all those situations. Third benefit of such a concept of using floating fixtures, I think, is that they're simple and clean and hygienic. So in this case, in addition to this beautiful kind of ski lodge motif, it actually is a ski lodge, it's not a motif. You see that the bowl itself is skirted with clean, without any nooks or crannies for all types of debris to collect It's easy and simple to clean off with a cloth. And then, of course, the bowl is off the floor, so it's easy to use a mop or, let's say, a Swiffer. No need to bend down in hands and knees. And, of course, lastly, I'm going to say, ask about what I know is missing, and it's the tank. And again, it's behind this area here where you see this rectangle plate and these two circles. Next, such a concept offers a lot of versatility, which I think is one of the great attractive points to the design community. Imagine that you're able to set your location of the fixture practically anywhere in the bathroom. Think about how you could make the most efficient use of space, or your client perhaps has a unique vision of how things should look. Well, with these kind of systems, you can place the fixtures nearly anywhere within the bathroom. And it's not just a toilet. I know I've highlighted that so far, but it also can be used for urinals, bidets, wash basins, or vanities, for example. Now, further imagine, in talking about flexibility, that you live in a multi-generational household and you have grandma and grandpa who live with you now. By taking the fixtures off the floor, you can focus to put them at a nice height to match their needs, to meet perhaps ADA requirements in public spaces, or even just more general universal design. And of course, last but not least, you guessed it, there's no tank. It's hidden behind in here. Recently, I spoke to an architect who renovated a condo such that the owner had the floor-mounted toilet on one end of the room, and in his mind, he wanted to move it to the opposite end of the room. And with this kind of a system, the architect was able to do that, and while running drainage pipes above the floor. So in addition to just gaining a look, there are also some installation and material benefits. Finally, I think a benefit, which in these days and ages is table stakes, but of course these kind of systems must save water. Without that, no one would pay attention to them. In fact, most of these systems are dual flush, and if you're familiar with dual flush, that means there's two buttons, one large button for solids and a small button, which is a smaller flush volume for liquids. In fact, the dual flush can save a family of 11,000 gallons per year. I figured it out, that's 70,400 bottles of water, which is quite a bit. And of course, as you may not think about, you pay for water both when it comes in the house and also when it leaves the house. In addition, having water savings opens up these kind of design concepts for LEED accreditation and also for WaterSense rebates and so on in certain jurisdictions. And of course, by now, I think you probably have an idea where I'm headed with this. There's a tank missing, but it's behind the wall. The question I do get, though, is do dual flush products really save water? Yes, I can tell you they do. There have been numerous studies that show this. In fact, the government actually specifies what they call effective water use, which is the average of one of the big flushes and two of the small flushes together. So it's well defined and well known. So to summarize, I've introduced you to the floating fixtures, and now I'm going to summarize the benefits. I talked about space savings, or space gain, if you will, to open up small rooms and create more spaciousness. I showed you a beautiful bathroom that was modern, but also told you about my own experience with the more traditional bathroom. And the third benefit was easy to clean, more hygienic, with skirted toilets and everything hidden behind the wall. It's much nicer from that standpoint. Fourth was about flexibility, freedom to locate fixtures where you want them, which I think about as building blocks for all types of fixtures. That means not just the toilet, but also for urinals and bidets and vanities. And of course, flexibility also refers to the fact that these kind of systems can be can be customized to meet the needs of the user, to match their height requirement that they need, for example, in ADA or accessible or universal design applications. And then finally, of course, the water savings. Dual flush products are well known to save water, and saving water means bringing money back to your pockets. By now, you probably have a lot of questions. I'm going to hopefully address some of them now as we keep going on. I'll explain how this all works, and we'll go from there. So just to get started in a general way, I want to show you how a system is set up. What are the basic elements? And I'm going to start and work my way in from outside the wall to inside the wall. So from the most beautiful, that's the wall-mounted toilet bowl, to the flush actuator plates themselves, which you actually use to flush the toilet, and then finally to the concealed tank and carrier frame, number 3 here, which is the piece behind the wall that I kept mentioning earlier. First, I'll start with wall-hung toilets. In our marketplace, there are over 12 manufacturers and well over 100 wall-hung toilets that are compatible with these kind of systems in many shapes, round front, elongated, square shapes, different colors, skirted, unskirted, concealed mountings, and so on. From brands that I'm sure are quite familiar with, including Kohler, Toto, and some European brands like Duravit, Laufen, Villeroy & Boch, and even DXV from American Standard. These toilets are all back outlet, which means that the waste actually travels out of the fixture and into the wall, which is quite different than a floor-mounted toilet. Additionally, these kind of wall-hung toilets are very popular for adding bidet seats on top. Secondly, in general, wall-hung toilets, the second thing that you need to think about is related to the performance, and they have a good performance. You'll typically have choices between a water savings between 1.6 and 1.28 gallon choices, as well as combinations that meet EPA water sense requirements for 20% reduction water savings. And finally, many of them also have a strong evacuation performance or flush performance with MAP scores of 600 grams or more. So beauty and performance are achieved even in these kind of systems. The second component is the decorative flush actuator. And in this arena, there are plenty of choices to meet any design need. So there are actual plates themselves. There are also other choices that are a bit slimmer and smaller that can be rounded remotely. Even options for urinals, for example. You can see here designs for square, designs for round, all different finishes and colors. Materials including glass and stone, metal and plastics, so on. One thing I should point out here is that between manufacturers, the flush actuators are not compatible. So pick the one you like and go for the design. The third and final component of any of these kind of systems is the concealed tank and carrier frame itself. And here are some of the basics. These systems come really in sort of two flavors, like tanks that fit in 2x6 walls and frames that fit in 2x4 walls. And that's a great flexibility because depending on your need. So you could have a renovation where you have a 2x4 wall only, and now there's a product that fits in there. The cool thing is these also work for within studs, wooden studs, or even steel studs, and even in front of concrete or brick walls, which is a great solution for some older buildings, especially here in Chicago where I'm at, where there are rules about rules related to what you can and can't do with historical buildings. The other thing is these frames allow you to do is to build different types of walls. I showed you earlier about a pre-wall. They can also create freestanding walls with these kind of systems, and even some any kind of crazy angled shapes can be used. From a wall cladding standpoint, these kind of systems accept every kind. So drywall, stone, tile, paneling, and different wall thickness depths. The second thing to keep in mind is that you also have choice again in performance. So these systems come in typically in two different flush water saving options, 1.6 and 1.28, and of course also in water sense combinations. Now let's take a, I call behind the scenes look at the carrier and tank frame itself, a little bit more about this kind of unusual thing that when I show to contractors a lot, they feel like it's something that NASA designed, but really in its heart, it's very simple and in a few key areas. So first is the support frame. This is steel. Number one question that I receive is, will it hold me? And I can tell you without a doubt, yes. In fact, you can hold almost 900 pounds without damage to the unit or to the wall. So this is a great benefit. Finally, these kind of systems use threaded rods that are screwed into the frame, as I'm showing here, to mount the bowl to. The second key feature of any kind of a concealed installation system is the height adjustment. I mentioned this earlier in terms of the flexibility. So it's possible to raise and lower the frame, these legs, to accommodate seat heights as a user wants, or to meet ADA requirements, for example. The third major component of any system is the tank itself. These are generally plastic tanks of an engineered plastic, and I should say it's much thicker than a milk bottle or a bottled water bottle that you think of. This is really solid and strong, designed for these kind of applications. Additionally, all these tanks are insulated to prevent condensation forming on the outside, which is, you really don't want that when it's behind the wall. Diving deeper inside the tank, one of the cool things I think is this type of systems don't have any chains or flappers. I know from my own experience, and probably you have the same, that this is really painful and causes a lot of heartache from time to time. So it uses a different system where the components are actually locked together, twisted and locked together, so that this type of issue doesn't happen. Additionally, as I mentioned before, these types of systems can come in two different flush volume flavors, and most of them come as dual flush ready, so that the installer doesn't have to do anything out of the box. They just install it. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, the waste it goes into the wall, and there's usually a fitting that comes with to allow for that. And finally, the question, what do I do if I have to service it? And of course, the cool thing is, behind the actuator panel is an opening, and within that opening is access to all the internals. Because no, you don't need a sledgehammer, although I like to joke about that with people from time to time. Okay, so now that I've explained the system, I'm going to show you how it might be installed in a residential renovation in a 2x4, but these same basic steps will also apply across new construction as well. So in this first part, you see that the bowl is being set to the height. Then the studs are being prepared for mounting the frame portion itself. As I mentioned earlier, this can be done with 2x4 or 2x6 studs, both in wood and metal. Frame is adjusted to the height and now attached to the studs themselves. This can be done with lag screws, for example, directly into the wood, or also with through bolts, or in the case of steel studs, directly into the blue frame itself. So that's kind of neat and interesting. Next, we attach the waste outlet to the main drainage system. It's a 3-inch drainage, the 1/2-inch supply. The supply is then attached to the fill valve, and it's ready to go at the rough end. After the wall cladding is on, the plumber will come back, install the toilet and the flush actuator, test it, and all set to go. It's really as simple as that. Those are the basic steps. Not so bad, is it? But then, of course, now that's installed, that's great. It looks easy to install, but what about the service? I know, Ron, that you mentioned that I can go behind the actuator plate and reach in, but what does that look like? Let me show you. So first, remove the actuator plate. This is pretty typical. And remove some of the internals. Disconnect the filling valve. That can be removed for service. And then next comes the flushing valve itself. So the gasket can be washed off or can be replaced. It's very simple. It's not a flapper that's, as I mentioned, that's attached to a chain earlier. And it can, if possible, you can reuse it or replaced. And then the flush valve is set back into the tank. And now we can see how the service of the fill valve goes. This is very along the similar lines. Try washing it first and reinstalling it. And replacement parts for systems such as these are available through most plumbing wholesalers. And that's how the servicing is done. I was once challenged by a sales man to see how fast I could go through and remove all the components, and my best time was around 13 seconds. So it is really as easy as it shows there. At this point, I'd like to pause for a few minutes and see if there are any questions that have come in.
Okay, hi Ron, it's Jamie here with the marketing side. We do have a couple of questions. I will go through the first one. The first one was, what is the warranty?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm actually going to answer that later on. It varies from manufacturer to manufacturer to answer that question, but I will talk specifically about Geberit here in the next few minutes.
Okay, you have time for another one?
Yes.
All right. Is there maintenance needed, and what does that look like?
With any gasket material that's in the water system, there is going to be some maintenance that needs to happen from time to time, and it's really, for the most part, just what I just showed in that video, servicing the flush valve seal and the fill valve seal.
Okay, and we have another one. It says, can you explain the 1.1 GPF for certain customer lead requirements?
Sure. So lead actually uses the formula I talked about earlier, where the flush volume is calculated, it's called effective flush volume. So, and it's calculated taking the average of one large flush and two small flushes in a dual flush system. So in a 1.1 1.6 large flush with a 0.8 small flush, you can come to an smaller effective flush volume below 1.28. It comes out to about 1.1, I believe. Okay. So it's the average, and this is what all the main green kind of guidelines use. They use this as the calculation: one large flush, the average of one large flush and two small flushes, and that effective flush volume will vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, or from because they could have 1.6 and 0.9, or even in the case of having a 1.28 large flush with a 0.8 small flush, for example, that provides an effective flush that's lower. So it's just a way of representing the actual amount of water that gets flushed out in the system.
Okay, we have another one. What is the life expectancy of the tanks?
That is also a great question. Well, I'll put it to you like this. If Geberit's been in this game for over 50 years, and a few years ago was the 50th anniversary of the concealed tank. And we found a building that had one of the original tanks from 50 years ago. So I would say a long time. And I'll get into a bit more about that next. Thank you, Jamie.
One more?
Sure.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Is the Geberit tank compatible with other manufacturers' commodes?
Short answer, yes, and I'll get into that, actually more specifics about that coming up. Okay. Perfect, thanks, Jamie. All right, everyone seems to be very interested to know about Geberit. Well, this is the time when I shift gears now and talk specifically about Geberit and who we are and our products in particular, and how they help in your designs and should be your preferred product choice. Just as a brief introduction, Geberit is a global company. We're Swiss-based with sales of over $3 billion worldwide. We have own employees in almost 50 countries, including Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, and of course here in North America. Additionally, in North America, we have 3 production companies, and also Geberit is if you're familiar with Chicago Faucets, is the parent company of Chicago Faucets since 2002. In the US, our operations are based in Des Plaines, Illinois, just outside of downtown Chicago. Geberit produces products in 3 main areas. This includes installation and flushing systems, piping systems, and bathroom systems, as you can see here. In North America, we primarily focus on installation systems, and of course, that's the topic for today. Supporting that, there are also some specialty fittings in the drainage system which are available to support that. Geberit here in the North America also focus on bath drains, faucets for commercial space rather, through CFC, through our Chicago Faucet brand. And then finally, Geberit also produces fill and flush valves on an OEM basis for other toilet or commode manufacturers. So if I seem a little bit excited about talking about Geberit and confident in the company, I feel that way because I know that in some ways Geberit is actually a technology company that manufactures plumbing products, and we invest nearly 3% of our sales back into R&D every year to help provide more innovative and beautiful products year after year. In fact, in 2019, that approximates to about $80 million US, just in development. You can find Geberit here in North America and worldwide in many different applications, including hospitality, residential, single-family, multifamily, commercial applications, and even retail. And this includes both site-built construction and also modular built construction. You see here on the right hand, actually that's a modular build. That's the Bowery Citizen M in Manhattan. Also, you can find Geberit in the Neiman Chicago Tower, Radisson Blu Tower, and the Burj in Dubai. So now that I've also told you about the system and a bit about Geberit, I will now shift gears, as I said, to talk to you specifically about Geberit and the Geberit difference. So we'll go back to the same basic elements. I'll go through each of these: the bowl, flush actuator, and concealed tank. So the thing I want to tell you about the bowls is, although in North America Geberit doesn't have a bowl of our own, all those dozen manufacturers and all those bowls I talked to you about earlier are still available. This also goes to the question that came up. And here's why I say that. At Geberit, we use an open platform. We don't discriminate on the basis of bowl brand. And that includes other companies that have concealed installation systems and bowls. And while some companies generally only test their own tank and bowl, but not other bowls, here at Geberit, we feel like this is limiting design possibilities. And that's not fair to the community. But to ensure that we test all the Geberit tanks and bowls together at a third-party testing agency. This is the only way we can protect you and end users and ensure performance. And further, only those that pass are used and marketed by Geberit in our communications and in our trainings. So it really feels, I really feel strongly about that. What it says to me then is that now also, in addition, you don't have to sacrifice design or performance because of the fact that we do this testing, and that there are 2 water savings versions available depending on your locale. It really opens up all possibilities. You don't have to choose between design or performance. This means that in combination with Geberit concealed tanks, in one of 2 flush volumes, there are nearly 100 water sense combinations, which is higher than any other, which is quite high, and also helps, again, as I mentioned earlier, about perhaps local rebates that may be available. Check the EPA website for this. And within that group of 120, there are nearly 40 that flush with a very high performance of 600 grams or more. This is by far the most amount of combinations available on the market. And just to give you some perspective, 600 grams is about 5 quarter-pound hamburgers. So it's quite a bit. Along with this, I should tell you, this is why it's in bold and in orange, that the bowl and the tank must be mated in the right combination. So the flush volumes must match up to get the performance. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So if the tank is 1.6, the bowl must be 1.6, and so on. Finally, to help you with this in the specification to find the right bowl for the situation, I encourage you to download our brochure, Clean Design, from our website. It's a comprehensive guide that lists all approved combinations of bowls with Geberit tanks. In addition, highlights those which are water sense listed and those which are 600 grams or more. So I want you to feel confident that when you use our tools that performance is assured. Next, when it comes to flush actuators, Geberit is the leader in choice. With Geberit, there are nearly 100 choices of flush actuators. This spans the range of plates and buttons in over 9 families. It also includes all the popular shapes and finishes, flushing single and dual, and includes 2 families of touch-free, 2 touch-free families as well. also products for ADA applications. And then finally, I want to point out here that we have two sets of products. One is a front mount plate, which you saw in a lot of the pictures, which is called Sigma, and then a top mount plate, which you saw in some pictures in the pre-wall, which will be Omega family. I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. The next thing I should point out is that Geberit actuators are retrofittable. So that means if someone has, say, this one today, and then in 2 years they want to renovate and they want to move to a different shape or color, and they want to move over to the one next door, here they can do that. That's not a problem. It also means, for example, that someone could convert from a manual situation to touch-free. That's even possible without changing what's behind the wall. And then finally, Geberit offers design tools, and two that I especially want to point out are today are one, the Choice is Yours, which is a brochure, and I encourage you to download it. It's a complete line catalog or actuator plates. The cool thing is it's 100% scaled to Sigma plates to allow that designers or showroom consultants or end users can kind of see what it might look like on the wall. This is really a great tool. And secondly, online is kind of a similar thing. I call it a playground, an actuator showroom, where one can go in and choose the actuator family, finish, and play around with different backgrounds and real time to see how it might look. So with all these options, you can design the perfect bathroom today and also for tomorrow. So I'm going to take the next few minutes to show some of the most popular Geberit design families. First up is showing the Omega 60. The 60 series family are flush mounted, which means that it's smooth with the surface. And as I mentioned several times, again, that Omega refers to those which are on a top mount situation with a pre-wall. In this case, this is a Omega 60 in a white glass. Next, I'll show you the remote that I mentioned earlier. In this case, you see a really slim button or rectangle plate here mounted away from the tank. This is in the case where someone wants something that's a little bit less obtrusive, or it can also be appropriate for accessible or applications to put the controls in a more advantageous position. This is a customized Sigma 21. So one aspect of several of the actuator families is their ability to have a customized overlay created. You can set your own mood, be it with wood, stone, paneling, cloth, I've seen as well, or even just artwork. So you can do this in a round version, or even here, as I'm showing here, in a more rectangular version using Sigma 50. The flush mounted look, as you can see here, for an extra clean appearance is also available in the Sigma series in the front mount. This is shown as a brushed chrome. Next is a Sigma 70 in white glass. This is a really interesting product. Behind the wall, there's a mechanism that makes it a really light touch. So it works on a toggle. If you can imagine, this white line is kind of the pivot point, but also a decorative element. So you push on this larger side for the large flush, and then the smaller side for the small flush, and it takes just a fingers to touch it. It's also very slim against the wall. Then finally, the actuator I wanted to show you is the Sigma 80. This is really cool. It's hands-free, and these two light bars, this longer light bar represents the large flush, and the small bar represents the small flush. and it can be programmed by hand in 5 different colors to help match up with the decor. Finally, I want to focus on the concealed tank and carrier and talk about the Geberit difference. In this particular area, I think it comes down to a few key things. Geberit has experience, and the experience leads to more options, and that means a larger toolkit for you. Geberit has 80 million installations, concealed installations worldwide, including 5 million in 2019. These are mainly in 2x4 and 2x6 versions. And those are most popular for the design flexibility. 2x6 has a bit more flexibility in terms of it's a lower cost option, but application-wise, you can use them interchangeably. Secondly, not all manufacturers have this pre-wall solution, Omega solution, like we have. For top mounts, this is great as a problem solver below windows, for example, or even mirrors. This actually came up in a project in New York recently, where the design has a mirror that runs directly above, and with the height of a tank and carrier like this, we wouldn't be able to achieve that. So the other area, the second area where Geberit has a strong position is in the performance. As I mentioned earlier, there are 1.6 and even 1.28 full flush water savings options, and those 100 water sense combinations that I spoke about earlier. And then finally, Geberit is most unique in the number and type of the frames which are available. So this includes bidets, wash basins, and urinals, and this is not in every program range of all manufacturers. So with this toolkit, architects and designers, you guys can do almost anything, in my opinion, with these set of products. When we talk specifically about the Geberit concealed tank and frame, I want to focus on a few things, in addition to what you learned already earlier. And this is what we mean when we talk about know-how installed. First of all, the frame itself it's 16 gauge structural steel tubing, and which is actually produced in our own plant, and is painted blue and powder coated for 2 specific reasons. One is the corrosion resistance, but 2 is the plumber comfort. In fact, they did a survey of plumbers, and with different coatings, Geberit we did, and asked them which coating they liked the best. And they came back with the powder coat. And the reason for that was it's the warmest to the touch in the wintertime versus chrome plating or galvanizing or some other process. So I really have the installer in mind in that case. The second area is the time savings. This is quite unique as well, in that the legs themselves are spring loaded, which allows for a one-man installation. This means that legs don't fall out when you're trying to adjust them. And finally, most of the connections are done with a click, so that installation, you hear the click when the component is in the right, it's been installed in the right location. Third, this question goes to answer the earlier question. What about the Geberit? What about the tank? Geberit uses a blow molded tank, all one piece. And blow molding is the process that's used to make water bottles and so on. So there aren't any seams in it. It's like taking some molten plastic and blowing it up like a balloon. This HDPE, high density polyethylene, is also the material that car gas tanks are used out of. Geberit was the first to use this technology, and I told you the story, since 50 years. So that's really incredible. All the tanks are individually leak tested before they leave the plant. If they don't pass, then they get ground up, and that's the cool thing about recycling plastics. You just dump them in, melt it, and then you try again. Additionally, the tank is reinforced inside, and if we were together in the real world, I would jump up and down on the tank and show you just how strong it is, because it really is that robust. Finally, Geberit backs the product with a lifetime warranty against defects. It's really important that, to me at least, especially, that if something goes in the wall, that it has to last a lifetime. You shouldn't have to think about it or worry about it once it's covered up and behind everything. Along those same lines, the fill and flush valves carry a 10-year warranty. Again, we know that products that rubberized seals will have to be serviced at some point, but if they do, let's make it as infrequent as possible. So Geberit, we back those valves with a 10-year warranty. In addition, the fill valve is designed to be really quiet. Whisper quiet is actually even the best description. I can't think of a better one. Then finally, the Geberit Advantage is a tool-free maintenance. This means that all of the servicing I showed you earlier, that short video, can be done without tools. So this access to the supply stop, the fill valves, and the flush valves can be done without tools. Finally, I want to give you a few notes about planning. Until now, I focused on the Geberit difference with respect to the product, but to me, it doesn't stop there. This is what separates Geberit. It means it's about service and tools and support that you have with us. You see a picture here of our installation planning guide, and I think it really exemplifies what I'm talking about. The document is downloadable, and it contains what you need to know to plan, specify, and install a project with concealed installation systems. From all the way from product selection to wall construction and even to plumbing. I don't have time today to go into all details, but I would like to call out a few things the guide discusses of, things that you should be aware of if you're going to specify or work on these kind of systems. The first comes in the area of wall planning. You should know that actuator selection can be a determining factor regarding the finished wall thickness, the construction, and the material. So this is important when considering the flush-mounted actuators, for example, in the 60 series families, and for remote push buttons. The second thing is that during the installation, that the wallboard and the blue frame of the tank and carrier must be together and flush with the studs. Without this, it can create a spongy feeling when someone's sitting on the bowl, and over time it will damage the wallboard and tiles. So this is really important.
Yeah.
If using a remote button, it's the way they work is that when you press the button, it sends an air pulse actually to the tank to activate the flush. But this requires planning and knowing ahead of time to do that, to route this air hose behind the wall. And correspondingly, for some, using a hands-free activation with AC powered, running a transformer and wiring behind the wall needs to be planned for ahead of time. Second is in the area of seat height. This is one area that tends to go wrong quite often. Not all bowls and not all seats are designed the same. They don't have the same dimensions for mounting or sitting. So my advice to you is never put yourself in the bad position without all the information. To make sure that you cover yourself to get that the final proper seat height is in place, always have this information at your fingertips. Have the requested seat height, know what it is, know what the finished floor level is going to be, where it is, and then also really the bowl and cut sheets of the bowls themselves. This is really important. The guide actually walks through the steps of how to calculate the proper adjustment height of the carrier to meet the seat height that you need. But really, don't put yourself in a situation where you don't have the information, because ending up with a bowl that's too high or too low can, well, does create a lot of headaches. Next, you should know that everything for most residential installs is in the box, comes in the box from Geberit. This includes the mounting hardware, it includes the supply stop, and it includes the waste fitting and other rough-in components. If you're doing a commercial job or high-rise, or in an area, some markets like Chicago, where you have to have you can't necessarily use plastic behind the wall. Geberit does. We do offer a cast iron fitting, a 3-inch cast iron accessory, and other specialty fittings for right and left hand ganged installations and for back-to-back installations. And then finally, a note about the drain, waste, and venting. First and foremost, the same rules that apply to floor-mounted toilets apply to wall-hung toilets and concealed installation systems. So follow local codes. There's no difference there, so that's a great help. There is one piece of advice that I would give definitely, and I can't stress this enough, is the waste outlet behind the wall needs to be positioned and an orientation from plus or minus 45 from vertical, as showing in this diagram here. That's because we want to use, like in all plumbing, we want to use gravity as our friend, and this makes sure that there's enough momentum to move the waste out of the bowl and down the line enough. When the waste fitting is not set to this orientation, the flush just kind of sits around in the bowl. The bowl doesn't evacuate, the water sits there, and so does everything else. So this is very important to keep in mind, to pass on to the installers and in planning. But one of the nice things that this allows is that you can actually use this then to develop plumbing above the floor, which in, let's say, multi-story buildings is a considerable advantage. More cores is more expense. And even in many residential applications, breaking through the floor plate is really an undesirable situation. Okay, so now before we wrap up, let me just review the benefits of concealed installation systems. Of course, I talked about space gaining and space savings to make it more spacious. I talked about the look, both modern and traditional. Choices are endless. Easy to clean with skirted toilets and components hidden behind the wall. No need to bend over. Flexibility in terms of fixture location, fixture type, and fixture height. And then finally, the water savings. And lastly, what I want to, I leave you with this. When you combine all those things together, this is what you can achieve. The choice is yours. So with that, I'll ask Jamie if there are any additional questions.
Sure, we have a couple. The first one is, does Geberit plan on bringing into the States their version of the bidet seat combo?
Not at this time. There are no plans.
Okay. What is the load amount on that sink carrier?
Uh, 110 pounds, 50 kilograms.
Okay. And then I actually have a question. Which is more popular, the Sigma or the Omega?
Sigma by far. Omega is really has its place. It's kind of a niche product as a problem solver when necessary. But Sigma is the #1 for sure.
Great. Well, that are the questions that I am seeing at the moment.
All right. Well, then let me wrap up by saying a few last things. So after hearing all this, I really encourage you, please take advantage of our online tools. Check out our online locators at geberit.us to learn more about the products, to learn more about Geberit, to find a showroom, to find a trained installer in your area, distributor, contact a rep and request a sales call or to set up a training. And that could be at your place, it could be at a different facility, it could be at our place, it could be with your contractor, with your architect, with your designer, really anyone who needs it. And finally, I would urge you to download and read through and distribute the planning guide for in-wall systems. And then if there are any questions, also you can contact us at our main office or contact customer support or technical support as well. My contact information is up in the right-hand corner. I'm again Ronn Jefferson, and my email is ron.jefferson@geberit.com. And lastly, thank you again for joining. I really appreciate it. I hope you took something out of it. There is a survey which is attached to the chat. Please take a few minutes to fill that out for us to help us improve. And I'd also like to point out that a few last things. One, you'll be getting the questions and answers. You'll also be getting a link to recording of this. Additionally, I'll be holding a replay of the webinar next week on the 21st. And then upcoming are two additional topics, our two additional sessions about cable drains next week on the 23rd and the 28th. So with that, I want to wish everyone a good day, be safe, and thank you.